So recently, I've been making unique animation rigs for my game. None of the others previously felt like a rig that other people would want to use, but this one is different. It's an around the world animation where there's a static walking character that has the world moving behind it. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make this rig from scratch. I also included a blend file in the description on GitHub, and this has the template for everything already set up. The file in the description might not be the best to jump into if you aren't familiar with grease pencil modifier stacks, or if you want more or less than 5 sections in your revolving background, because the template is set to 5 different parts of the circle. So that's what this video is for. We're going to explain how everything fits together and works, and show you how you would go about making your own from scratch. Let's get right into the tutorial. Okay, here we are in Blender. I'm going to select New 2D Animation. If you accidentally just press General, you can go to New 2D Animation. My New 2D Animation file might look different than yours, and that's because I have some settings changed. In Render, I have the Transparent turned on, and this is in the Film section near the bottom. And in the View layer, I have the Depth Pass on. Those are two options that I always have on for Grease Pencil. So I went to Defaults, Save Startup File after making those two changes, which is why mine already looks like this. Okay, so let's talk about making the rig. The first thing I'm going to do is create a guideline in my Grease Pencil to show what things are looking like to know how it's deforming. So I'm going to go into the stroke, and I'm going to go into Draw Mode, and I'm going to draw a rectangle. I'm going to make sure that I do my best to fit the rectangle to the screen with just a tiny bit on the outside of the screen. And I'll press Enter, go into Edit Mode, and press 1 to see the points, and then I'll subdivide. I think 10 subdivisions should do. I just want to make sure that the Grease Pencil has enough points so that the deformation will work. I'll go back into Draw Mode, and then I'll draw a line, and this line will represent the ground. And that's my basic guide for what I want to see as it's deforming. I'll subdivide the ground too, maybe about 5 times. And now my point density looks pretty uniform throughout. Here I have my 4 layers that I like to use in all my grease pencils, but let me just delete everything except for the first one. I want 5 sections for this tutorial. These 5 sections will be strung together to create a circular world. If you want a different number of sections, you can do that. Your math will just be a little bit different, but it's going to be pretty much the same. You should be able to follow along. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new group, and I'm going to call this group Section 1. I'm going to put my lines into Section 1, and now I'm going to duplicate and create 5 more sections. The reason that I spent all that time doing that is because in Grease Pencil, you're going to want some more layers. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply all these modifiers to these different sections. That way, if we want to draw, we'll have that freedom where we can just go into the group, add as many layers as we want, draw whatever we want, and the modifiers will take care of it for us. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a mesh that will help me visualize how I need to curve my lattice. So I'm going to go into Object Mode, and I'm going to add a mesh. It doesn't matter which one. I'll click a pane, and then I will select all in Edit Mode, press M, and merge at the center. Oh, let me get the screencast keys on. There you go. Now that I have this plane that I've turned into a single point at the center, I'll press E and Z to extrude it up. Basically, I just made a vertical line. Now, with this vertical line, I'm going to select it, and let's name the vertical line our 5 split. This 5 split is going to give us a guideline for how curved we need each section to be. So I'm going to go into the 5 split in its modifiers, and I'm going to add an array modifier. That's in Generate. And it says Legacy Array. I'm actually on Blender 5.1 for this tutorial. So I'm going to use the new array because it has some options that are going to help us. In the array modifier, I'm going to set the offset method to offset. I'm going to make 5 different sections, And I'm going to take the translation and zero it out. Since there's 5 different sections in the rotation Y, I'm going to type 360 divided by 5. And I can see now that that is 72. And I can also see that my 5 split looks like a 5 slices of pizza. And so this is going to help me for each section. It's going to be like a slice of pizza going around the circle. This number 72, or whatever your number is for the number of sections you have, is going to be a number that's going to be recurring. So you should remember 72, or whatever number. Now, I don't want this vertical line to go straight up like this. I want the vertical line to go down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the scale of our 5 split, and I'm going to press S, Z, -1. There we go. And now my 5 split is just a little bit rotated, basically. So what I'm going to do is now move this 5 split directly down on the Z axis, and I'm going to scale it up. And my goal here is to make it so that the sides of the diagonal lines line up with the corners of our camera view. There we go. So now that I have our diagonal lines, these are going to be the diagonal lines that I fit my lattice to. But the lattice needs a curved top too. So I'm going to select my 5 split, press Shift S, and move the cursor to it. Then I'm going to press Shift A to add a curve. I'm going to add a circle. 2 actually. But let's start with this one. When you add a circle in grease pencil, it's actually facing the wrong way. It's facing down. Let me press 0 to go back into the camera view. What you have to do is press RX90. And now the camera and the circle are in the same orientation. Without moving the circle, I'm just going to scale it up. And the first circle, I'm going to scale up to the bottom of the camera. Then I'm going to duplicate that circle, right-click to duplicate in place without moving it. And then I'm going to scale it up more so that it's at the top of our camera. And you can try to do this as good as you can. I like to add just a little bit of wiggle room on the top and bottom. And so that is what we have. And now we can start to see the deformation start to form, and we can see what it's going to look like. So to make it, I'm going to actually add a lattice object. That's what's going to be our actual deformation. Before I do that, my cursor's way down here, so I want to change it back to the middle. So I'm going to press Shift S, and I'm going to put my cursor and return it to the world origin. Then I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to add my lattice. I'm going to scale down my lattice on the Y to 0.01 so that it's flat. And then in the lattice options for the data tab, I'm going to take the V and make it 1. Because I don't want 2 points going away from the camera. I want everything to be flat. Then I'm going to scale the lattice as best as I can once again to the camera view. So I'm going to drag this X until I'm right about on the camera view. And I'm going to drag the Z if I'm right about on the camera view. There we go. Basically, the goal now is to take the resolution U and create vertical divisions, and then I'm going to line them up to my circles. Once I'm done with that, then I can add these horizontal divisions, but adding them now just makes it harder to fit the lattice to the curve, so I'm going to keep W at 2 for now, for the top and bottom. I'll add them at the end. Now, the next thing we have to try to do is line up all the points of these lattice to where the circle is. But as it is, it's kind of hard to see where the points on the circle are. Even if I go into edit mode, it's a Bezier, so I can't really see anything. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click these circles and I'm going to convert them to meshes. And I'll do that for both the circles. Now, at least when I go into the mesh, I can see where the points are. Now, this point doesn't really line up with our 5 split perfectly, but don't worry about that. It won't be quite perfect, but it'll be good enough. Now, If I go out of edit mode, it's still really hard for me to see where each individual point on the circle is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click my 5 split again, and I'm going to set my cursor to the 5 split again. Then I'm going to go into edit mode of the circle, and I'm going to change my transform pivot point to the 3D cursor. And now I'm going to select all these points along the top that I want to see where they are. I'm going to press E to extrude, and I'm going to right click to cancel, and then I'll scale. And since I'm scaling relative to the cursor, now I can more easily see where these points are. It doesn't really help when I go out of edit mode, but what I can do is select these points again, and then press X to delete, and then delete only faces. Now I can easily see where all those points are because I created more geometry in the form of a wire to see where all of these points are and where I need to put my lattice. I'm going to do the same thing with this circle on the bottom, except in the reverse. Select all these points, press E to extrude, cancel the movement by right-clicking, and then scale down with S. Then select all the points again, press X, and delete only the faces. Oh, it looks like I missed some. Okay, so now we have the correct curves and number of points here, but the problem is that our lattice has more divisions than our mesh does. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the number of divisions in the lattice to match however many points we have on the mesh. So I'm just going to count. So the mesh has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 divisions. So that means the lattice needs a resolution U of 11. Now that I have the correct number of points to line up, it's just a matter of doing it. I'll go into edit mode and select this top right point, and I'll line it up. Now you might be confused about what point to line up to. Is it this one, or this one? For this, we're going to choose this point on the bottom left. This point is created by the intersection between our 5 split that we made and the bottom ring of the mesh. The bottom ring of the mesh is closest to the camera, so we want it to go there so that as much of our canvas as possible ends up on the final product. I'll continue lining up these points and then we'll get back to it. Okay, so I have lined up those points. I opted to line up those points manually by zooming my camera in, but if you wanted them to be perfectly exact, you could press Shift S and move your cursor to every single point and take every single point and snap it to the cursor one at a time for all 22 points. If you do that, all power to you because your deformation is going to look better. But I'm a little bit lazy and I just eyeball it and do my best. But at this point, we have a lattice, and the lattice is perfectly curved to 2 circles. At this point, I don't need these 2 circle meshes anymore. They were just to help me line things up. Now we're looking at the lattice. I can add more W divisions, and the W divisions, now that I've already curved the top and bottom, will follow the curve of everything else, which is a great way to create a curved lattice. By the way, I want to point out curved lattices like these are actually quite useful for other deformation other than what we're doing now. I'll let you think about what else you might want to make a curved lattice for, but now you know how. So let's take a look at how this looks for the grease pencil. So I'm going to go into the grease pencil and I'm going to do a deform modifier for the lattice. I'm going to select the lattice. And this is what it looks like. I want to try and get this to line up as much as I can with the 5 split, because once we duplicate this and move it around the circle, we want the transition point to not have any gaps or anything like that. So I can see that things are a little bit off. That probably had to do with either how I drew the guideline or how I placed the lattice or whatever other number of considerations. So to make this line up, what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to adjust the strength of the lattice. You can move the strength past 1 if you double click to type and you type a number greater than 1. So I'll click 1.1 there, and now I'll use this strength slider, holding shift so I don't change it too much, to line up the lattice with the grease pencil the best that I can. And it looks like that is just about the best I'm going to get. Things line up pretty nicely. Now, we have 5 duplications of our canvas, but right now they're all just stacked on top of each other. The last thing we have to do is move them around the circle. To do that, I'm going to go into my modifiers, and I'm going to add offset modifiers. Let's call this offset 1 for the section 1. Then I'm going to go into the influence and select, oh, wait a minute. Section 1 is already where it needs to be in the camera. So I'm going to actually make this go into the group by clicking this button, and I'm going to click section 2. Then I'll rename offset 1 to offset 2. So I only need offset for section 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now I can go and create the offset. So I can move the section over and down, and I also have to rotate it. The rotation has to be the same so that it fits around the circle, and it's that number that we found from making the 5 split. If you forget it, you can go back to the 5 split in object mode and look at it. The number for us was 72. So I'm going to go back to the grease pencil object, and I'm going to change the rotation Y to 72. Now, to line it up, I'm just going to use location X and Z to do my best at lining it up section 2 to where it should be, right next to section 1. It doesn't have to be quite perfect, but as good as you can get. Because keep in mind, this guideline is just going to give us where we're drawing. If it's a little deformed, it won't make a difference if our drawing looks a certain way. So we can always adjust the drawing itself to make these pieces look like they fit together seamlessly. So that's section 2. And now I'm just going to repeat this offset process for the other sections to complete the circle. So it's exciting to look at, but it's not actually done, because we want this world to rotate behind the character. But if I click the grease pencil and I rotate it, it's not going to work. And if I click the lattice and try to move that instead, it's not really going to rotate everything either. Even if I take the 5 split, it doesn't really do anything, it was just a guide. So how are we going to rotate this? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to add an armature modifier at the bottom of the stack. So as it stands, our modifiers first deform the canvas and stretch it into a curve, and then after it does that, then it starts moving them around. So the modifiers will work from the top to the bottom. So if we add an armature modifier at the bottom, then we can take all this information of curve and placement, and then we can modify that by moving it around again, this time with an armature. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to click the 5 split, and I'm going to add an armature there. So to do that, I have to use my cursor. So I'm going to make sure my cursor is on the armature, so cursor to selected, and then I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to add a single bone armature. Then I'll go into edit mode and click the bone, and let's call this bone, oh, by the way, I pressed F2 to rename the bone. Let's call this bone BG for background. You can actually add more to this armature if you want, but for this tutorial, all we need is this one single bone. If you wanted to add more bones, you could just duplicate and add them into your canvases, and then just make sure that they are parented to the original bone. And then once we rotate this bone, they'll rotate along with it and along with the world. If instead of an armature, you wanted some sort of 3D object, or maybe another grease pencil object to follow along with the rotation of the armature, you could do that too. Let me add a cube, and say that I want this cube to follow along with the rotation of the armature. What I can do is select the cube, and go into the Constraints tab, add a constraint called child of. Then I can select the armature and the bone in the armature BG. Our cube will go flying off into who knows where. I'll just click clear inverse to make it go back to somewhere I can see it, and then I'll move it wherever I want. But now, wherever this cube is now connected to this bone. So now the cube, just like the bones, can also follow around our armature. So that is how, if you wanted to use this around the world to add more things than just grease pencil, you could. Anything that can accept a child of constraint can work this way. Let me delete all this extra stuff. Okay, but now that we've talked about how this armature might work for you, let's make sure that it's actually working. Because right now, if I go into the pose mode of the armature and turn it around, nothing happens. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to click the grease pencil, hold shift, and then click the armature, and then press Ctrl P, and we're going to parent with empty groups. So now, if we go back to the grease pencil, we can see what happened. We just gave it a parent. What that parent did was create an armature modifier for us, and it already put it at the bottom of the stack for us. So it is happening at the very end, so it's not going to mess with all the other stuff that came before it. Then, if we go into the data tab of the grease pencil, we can look down here in the vertex groups and see that Blender created the vertex group BG, which, if you remember, that was the name of the bone. It was BG. And so now our vertex group is already created for us. I like to drag my vertex groups way to the top because I like to see them as I'm working. So I like to move it up if I can. There we go. I like my vertex groups up here. Unfortunately, I can't save that in my auto startup file, but I really like it. In any case, what we have to make sure is that our grease pencil, every point that we create when we're drawing, is actually assigned to BG. And right now it's not because I selected empty groups. So what we have to do is go into edit mode and press A to select every single point, and we're going to assign it to BG. So now we have an armature with a bone named BG, and we have a grease pencil object with the modifier and the group called BG. And so now we can go in and we can rotate the world. And this is how it looks. Looks pretty nice. If you zoom in, you can see that it's not perfect, and that's just down to human error. You can only draw and line things up so well. Even if you did that thing with the cursor where you lined up all the points perfectly, you still had to draw the actual canvas base, so things are just not going to be perfect all the time. But we did our best. And when you do your drawing, you can tweak things to make those imperfections pretty much invisible. So it's important to note that every point that you create from now on in draw mode needs to be bound to the vertex group BG. Because if I draw here, and it's not, when I go to the armature and rotate it, those points aren't going to follow along. And so this can become pretty annoying if you don't have everything where you need it to be. So what I like to do is actually go into draw mode and press this button here, add weight data for new strokes. And so since I have the BG vertex group selected, when I draw, these points that I just drew will already be in the vertex group, which is kind of assumingly what I want. So let me talk about how to use the armature, because as it is, this is still not usable if you don't know what's going on. So first of all, when I try to draw as it is, the cursor is not following where my mouse cursor is, and it's really going like crazy, especially on the edges. So when you're actually drawing, what I like to do is turn off all of these offsets and lattice modifier, and the screen returns to a flat, nice canvas for me to draw on. I like to go into the data tab and hide all the sections that I'm not working on by pressing the hide button on their group. Then I can draw whatever I want, And those things that I draw, I can see how it would look like if it's curved by turning all these modifiers back on. And as you can see, it is quite different, but it's not so different that you can't just draw a normal canvas and turn it into this around the world situation. The other thing that comes up is we're stitching together these canvases. So the transition between them, we don't want it to be like a strong rectangular line unless that's what we're going for. So what I like to do is I like to go into my modifiers and I add another deform modifier. This one is offset, and I'm going to call this temporary offset. This temporary offset is what I'm going to use to preview the transitions between my two canvases so that I can draw each canvas correctly so that they line up nicely. So what I like to do here is I like to go to Influence, Group, and then I'll select, for example, Section 2. But this temporary offset, I'm always changing the sections to preview different sections. So let's preview Section 1 and 2. So I'll select Section 2, make sure it's visible in the layers, and then in the modifiers, I can move this over and line it up here. And now when I'm drawing, I can draw Section 1 so that it has a nice transition with Section 2. Now make sure that the temporary offset is disabled in the render because you're going to get confused if you forget about it and then you render and then things don't look right and it's really hard to figure out because there's a lot of moving parts in this setup. So make sure that that render is turned off. And you can turn that off and on in the viewport by pressing the screen icon. So let me just draw some examples and show you how it all looks stitched together, and then we'll end off there. So now I drew all the examples. If I turn them all on at once, they're all overlapping, so it's a big mess. But what you can do is if you want to preview how things look like stitched together, you can just hold your mouse button and drag up. And then all those modifiers that we set up will then work together to create this around the world effect. I hope this tutorial helps you, or maybe it just inspires you for things you can do in your grease pencil art. Before you go, I want to remind you about the blend file in the description that you can look at and download on GitHub. It was made in Blender 5.1, so you might want that to open it up. Thanks for watching, and good luck with your art. Bye bye.